Hello and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to another Conscious Together live stream. I am Lorian and I will be anxiety and getting to grips with my anxiety, our anxiety. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what anxiety is, the evolutionary benefits of anxiety, because almost all of our states have evolved for, or perhaps all our states have evolved for a purpose. And there's no such thing as a negative emotion or a bad state attached inappropriately, and we don't get stuck in it. So, we're going to look a little bit at why the state of anxiety, unpleasant though it feels, is sometimes a useful condition to find ourselves in, as long as we're not stuck there. We're going to talk a little bit about why worse in our modern society and our age is perhaps seemingly on the increase. And then we're going to look at mindfulness, look at anxiety through the mindful lens and how it might benefit, provide some relief or a solution for us being stuck in situations of anxiety that we would rather not be. And of course, we'll do some practices at the beginning and perhaps the end of today's broadcast. So I hope that you will join me in those if you wish to do so. So that's a little summary of what we are going to cover today. Watching live. If you're not watching live, please send us an email at the Conscious Together website and we will connect with you. And hopefully we will answer your questions in one of our live streams in the future. So we do hope to hear from you. So let's just take a moment to settle ourselves. And I'm going to introduce some breath focused meditations that can help support us in our management of the experience of anxiety. So, with all these practices, you do not have to take part if you feel they're not appropriate for you or they don't make you feel comfortable. Please discontinue them. But if you are happy to give them a go and how you find it. So the invitation is to sit or lie down as you prefer. And you may have eyes open or eyes closed as always, whatever feels most comfortable for you. But if you're happy to, just let the eyes gently close. Take a moment to sit yourself in a more upright position in your seat. And take a moment to notice how the mind feels right now. Is it busy with thoughts, full of noise? And if it is, what's the nature of those thoughts? Where are they taking you? Are they into the future, ruminating on the past? Or does it seem to be a random jumble of thought? We don't need to change this in any way. We don't need to stop the thoughts. We don't need to be having only pleasant thoughts. Just take a moment of the mind. And now bring your experience at the tip of the nose. And completely to this part of you might notice cooler air coming into the nose. You might notice leaving again. You might notice the experience of noses. You might notice spaces or gaps around the experience, places where there isn't any immediate sensation. And every time you're distracted by thought, just gently begin again. Come back to the experience of the breath at the tip of the nose. Felt physical sensations that are present. And now just gently slow the breath down if it feels okay to do so. Do this slowly, there's no rush. So perhaps breathing a little more fully. Of every in breath and every out breath. Sticking as closely as possible. And if we're lost to thought or distracted by the mind, simply gently begin again. And gently easing to do so. And you're not looking to challenge the breath. You're not looking to hold your breath. Comfortable. Bring a curious lens to how slowly you can breathe whilst being comfortable with the experience. And if the breath does become a little too slow and a little bit uncomfortable, just gently increase the rate, reset yourself, find a comfortable baseline, and begin again if you choose to. Notice what happens to the sensations in the mind and in the body, and slowing it down. Real moments of mindfulness. Just gently slowing the breath, staying with it as best you can. Noticing the pull of the thoughts, of any sounds. What happens to the quality of the mind? What associations arise with this experience? Best you can, if it feels okay to do so. Slowly breathing. And check in with whether this experience is pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. And just gently coming back to the space you're in, opening the eyes, taking a moment to look around the space that you stretch your shoulders if you need to, maybe take a sip of water and check in with that experience about the nature of your mind. Was it easy or challenging, frustrating, intuitive? Just see what's true for you. There's no right or wrong experience, no experience you need to have had or are looking for. Simply bringing the kindly detective to this experience. Thank you. So, with that opening practice, we'll turn to the topic of anxiety and a description of anxiety from the Oxford Dictionary of Psychology, no less, is that anxiety is a state of uneasiness accompanied by dysphoria. And dysphoria is the kind of satisfaction and unpleasantness. And somatic signs. So, somatic signs mean physical body signs. So, perhaps tightness of throat, fluttering of heart, butterflies in the tummy, that sort of thing. Symptoms of tension focused on apprehension of possible failure, misfortune, or danger. Challenges to the future. And anxiety is rooted in more than we can manage. It being overwhelming, it being impossible, it being too much. That is the essence of anxiety, as opposed to depression, which is typically a rumination of being stuck in the past. So, depressive tendencies, depressive thoughts are generally about the past, and anxiety is invariably rooted in an uncertain future. And it affects us, creates a volume of thoughts that can feel uncontrollable and overwhelming. And it affects us physically in the body with sensations, as I described earlier, and perhaps a tightness of the throat and the chest, tightness of the chest, unpleasant sensations in the tummy, the butterflies in the stomach. And it can also affect our blood pressure and our digestion as well. So, actually, more than superficial, albeit unpleasant physical sensations, it can actually have physiological impact, particularly if it's left unchecked for a long time. And this often manifests itself in our blood pressure and in our gut health, our ability to digest our food effectively. So, why the heck would we want anxiety? Why did evolution inflict this cruel trick upon us? And it's important to separate short spells of anxiety, which are perfectly natural, chronic anxiety sufferers and people who are almost locked in this state on a semi-permanent basis, for which understandably that is extremely unpleasant. So from on the balance of averages and based on our evolutionary needs for survival, anxiety helps us look out for danger. Fundamentally, you wouldn't want to be without any sense of anxiety. You would almost certainly be incredibly foolhardy and reckless and make bad decisions, undoubtedly, because this would mean that as a species and as an individual, we probably wouldn't have lasted nearly so long. Our anxiety, our willingness to avoid dangers and problems and be cautious is almost certainly to as a result, as it is certainly a cause or a contributing factor to our success and survival as a species. It's particularly important when you're raising children, and women raising children are more likely to develop. This is based on a personality disposition of neuroticism. And this, again, is, whilst unpleasant, is very practical because it helps you pay attention to your children and helps you try and keep them alive and healthy and successful. So we mock a little too freely and leave them to their own devices too readily, which is likely to have some challenging consequences as a result. So, just an enemy. And it really is so important with all our moods and emotions that we recognize the importance of them in the right circumstance. They all exist to bring our attention to something that we should be paying attention to, whether it's fear or anger or anxiety. The problem is that our modern world has some of our natural relief mechanisms for a lot of our negative emotional states. So, for example, you can't run away from your boss when they're having a go at you, and you're not really allowed to fight them either. So, we can't necessarily flee the circumstances we find ourselves in. We can't typically fight our way out of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And so we're left with an absence of our default solutions, physical solutions for managing. Now, doing things like sort of jumping around and screaming and shouting can help alleviate the pressure in the moment. But again, we're seldom in a position where we can do that freely without raising, although, of course, it doesn't bother your toddler one bit to do such things. So please recognize all your emotions as having valuable contributions. You don't want to be without any of them, but you don't want to be stuck in them longer than you need to be. And you don't want to not have an effective outlet for them. So I hope that makes some sense and that you're still with me. So that's some thoughts and reflections around the sort of evolutionary grounding for our anxiety, why we have it. It's not always a bad thing, although being stuck perpetually in a state of anxiety is very unhelpful and is extremely unpleasant. So, yeah, moving on, there is this sense that anxiety and mental health generally is getting worse in society and better reported. And it's quite likely that this is a result in the changing environment in which we find ourselves in. And we are, by and large, very fortunate. Most of you, if you're watching this stream, are going to be relatively safe and relatively secure and accepting the very interesting financial situation we find the world in at the moment. Most of us are having our basic needs well met. We are shelter. We are not likely to starve to death or freeze to death or die of thirst. We are not likely to be killed by the world, but if you're watching this stream, it's likely secure and relatively very well provided for. This means that our basic evolutionary needs have been met, which sounds like a wonderful thing, and really it kind of is. But that means that our mechanisms for spotting danger and for looking for problems are still very much active. And we probably wouldn't want to shut them down, because if our circumstances change, we do look out for to help us navigate a possibly uncertain future. So our psychological, our evolutionary infrastructure for anxiety and for spotting danger is still very much alive and well and active. And in the absence, as I say, of needing our core, it looks for other things that are wrong in life. And in an age of 24-hour media and social media, there is no shortage of feeds and information and inputs by which to judge ourselves unsuccessful, inferior, not keeping up with the Joneses, not having the right body, having the right career, having the right partner, having good enough family. All these things are surrounding us with a unrealistic mirror in which to judge ourselves against. And so we have a real default network that's running amok at the moment. And that is in large because of the 24-hour media cycles and the social media cycles we find on directly about, or we're not going to do anything directly about. And those are two subtly different things, but it's worth considering in your life. What things are you investing mental effort into worrying about, being anxious about, that you're not going to take any action on? And what might that tell you? And would that possibly give you an opportunity to behave differently of some of these things that are not great? But if you're not doing anything about, that really is just torturing yourself for no good reason. So I taught you of the success of a large number of aspects of modern living. And as with all things in the world, there is always this double-edged sword, and things that are good can all hold that sense of things where possible to help us navigate more effectively and to make better decisions about what's in front of us. Mindful lens support us and help manage our anxiety. And there's a few threads really, but ultimately being the detective, you are not your next thoughts. That these thoughts are part of your conscious experience, but they are not defining you. They are not the limit of you. And that you can have pleasant thoughts, unpleasant thoughts, very challenging thoughts, super useful thoughts. All of these things the mind is doing, but they are not you. You are not your next thought. You are not defined by your next thought. And mindfulness can help us find that space, that detachment from the experience, because thoughts really are incredibly compelling, incredibly sticky. They're like watching a very powerful movie, whether it's a pleasant movie, an action movie, a horror movie. But they're very much like that. When you get lost in the cinema, when you're watching a great piece of television or film, you are completely drawn into it and you forget everything else apart from the experience that's taking place. And that really is very similar to the experience of our minds. And it's so easy to and identifying with our thoughts and simply being completely lost to them and not being present with anything else around us but our thoughts. It's like they're a foghorn or some music dialed up to 100 volume, and everything else in the world is just drowned out by comparison. Our ability to interact with other people is drowned out against the backdrop of our minds. So mindfulness with thought, it really is the most practical, or one of the most practical aspects of mindfulness practice. The other thing that allows us to do is to recognize, well, perhaps actually, is this a thought that I want to follow? So again, by building that space in that we might recognize our thoughts and that we are not our next thought, we can make a decision whether or not we're going to follow that thought. So this anxious thought of the future, and this ties back to what I said a few moments ago about what are we worrying about that we're not going to take any action on. And it's really important to consider those things, because we do like to spend a lot of time talking to other people about the state of the world as we define it in the moment. And we love to share these stories with each other about how bad certain things are, and that may be incredibly true. And we both walk away, or we all walk away, with no further intention of doing anything about it than before we started. So it's worth bearing in mind when you're being mindful of your thoughts. Are these thoughts helpful? Are these thoughts useful? Are these thoughts ones you would choose to follow if you were being discerning? Are they helping you build a better future? Are they helping the people that you care about? And if the answer is no, then through mindfulness, you can choose to let go of those thoughts, and then some other thoughts will appear. And through practice, it becomes easier and easier to let go of these thoughts and allow them. And you won't stop your thoughts. And again, you don't want to stop your thoughts. They are there for a reason, they serve a purpose, they are quite useful sometimes. But when we are stuck in patterns of unhelpful thought, we need to allow to go. And what we can find is that our thoughts will recondition themselves through a dedicated practice of mindfulness by meditating regularly, observing the thoughts, and particularly by adding practices such as metta, so positive conditioning practices like metta, loving kindness, can help us profoundly recondition our thoughts. So it won't stop you getting negative thoughts. It won't stop you getting anxious thoughts. And again, you don't want to not have those experiences. You don't want to not have those alarm bells going off to warn you to potential danger and threats. Otherwise, life could get really challenging in a very different way. But you don't want those thoughts going off all the time. You don't want them overwhelming you. You don't want them keeping you awake in the middle of the night, the 2 a.m. thoughts as soon as you wake up and it's the middle of the night and all you're thinking about is all the things you've got to do in the morning, all the things that might be going wrong, all the creaks in the house that could mean that there's someone in there with you, etc. Right? All those things that the mind does to you. So those are some things that mindfulness can do. And the other thing, the practice that we did at the start, the slowing the breath down, is a super practical way of bringing the body to a place of calm. So our breath, whilst not strictly rooted in the mindful concept per se, body feels. And the body and the mind, I'm afraid to say, are linked. And if you are thinking stressful, worried, angry thoughts, then the body will respond accordingly with increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, with changes to your digestion, with changes to your mood, and vice versa. Right. And this is the important thing to remember. You can calm the body down simply by slowing the breath, breathing in and out through the nose, if you are able to breathe through the nose, slowly as you can, whilst remaining comfortable. And that's the important thing. This isn't a straining of the breath. This isn't an exercise in holding of comfort and space. And by doing that, you will relax the heart, you will relax the pulse, your blood pressure will ease, the digestion system, the digestive system will relax and start activating, because that when we're stressed, when there's chemicals and through social media, then it's very difficult to truly let go and relax. Global financial crunch, right? Then people's job security is lower and people's bills are higher, and that creates a double whammy of pressure, because you think, afford to heat my home this winter, can I afford to repair my car if it breaks, etc., etc. These things put us in a state of perpetual anxiety, perpetual stress, which means that our body is constantly potentially in this elevated sense of fight, flight, freeze. And we don't have the mechanisms to escape from it, because you can't fight the global economy by shaking a stick at it, and you can't run away from it. Right? We are mechanisms to safely, effectively, healthily allow our bodies to relax so that they can heal, so they can rest, so they can digest the food, and to help us recondition our thoughts into something more useful, more practical, so that we can perhaps have some better ideas of how we can support ourselves and better ideas of how we can support those that we love and our communities around us, because we're not locked in this state of perpetual fear and anxiety about the future. So simply breathing slowly is such a powerful change the state of our body, which can then help change the state of our mind. And on top of that, practices like metta, loving kindness, can really help us. So that if you haven't heard of metta before on one of our other streams, then it is intentionally bringing someone to mind, perhaps yourself, perhaps someone you know, perhaps someone you have a challenging relationship with, if you are experienced, by filling your mind with positive intention, genuine, heartfelt, yourself feel better. Won't stop negative thoughts. And again, we don't want to not have negative thoughts. We just don't want to be stuck in them. We don't want to be lost to them all the time. So a metta practice, slow breathing, and simply using mindfulness as a lens by which to study the mind with curiosity and note the patterns of the thoughts, and then make a judgment as to whether that will help further your goal. So, the final thought I want to make, I'll save for after the practice, actually. We'll have another practice, and then I'm going to talk about I versus me and how that interpretation of consciousness can be used. So position yourself comfortably, again, whether you're sitting or lying, eyes open or eyes closed as you prefer. Placing your attention, your awareness as best you can within the experience of the feet themselves. The direct, physical, felt patterns, the raw sensation, the pressure of the feet, perhaps the sense of pressure of any socks or shoes that might be wrapped around them. Pressure around and within the feet. Tingling. And the spaces between these sensations. And if you find yourself lost in thought or distracted by the movie theatre of the mind, just take a moment to note what those thoughts are, where they're taking you, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, whether they're useful in this moment or at all. And then begin again. Come back to the feet, placing attention within the feet as best you can. Back with the felt physical sensation. With the attention and the focus within the feet, how does it feel? Unpleasant? Other things will pop into consciousness, thoughts, sounds, other senses. Every time you notice that, just begin again, go back to the feet. Like moving a spotlight that flashes around when alerted by something else, and then bring it back to what you're investigating. Just rest in this experience of the feet for a minute or two longer. And when you're ready, just gently opening the eyes and taking a moment or two to orientate yourself back into the space around you. Stretching your neck if you need, wiggling the toes, the fingers, taking a drink of water if you need to. And once more, there's an invitation to mindful inquiry if you wish to. Simply reflecting on that practice, whether it felt pleasant, challenging, intuitive, frustrating, whether the mind's in the feet and anywhere else in the body, and whether there's anything to learn about the nature of the experience of your mind through that practice. And perhaps not, and that's quite okay. Part of this stream, just another sort of reflection. And this was an idea explored in The User Illusion by Tor Nirastranda. Again, my Danish might be butchering that. And he explores the concept of I and me. And the I in this context is consciousness itself, the 10 or so bits of data that it can process on any given second. And me is all the other underlying processes that are handling, receiving, disregarding the 11 million bits of data that come in every second. And the I, the conscious self, is responsible for supporting the development and learning of our new skills, particularly complex skills, things that we have to concentrate on and discern. And the me is the part of us that has already processed those skills. So it's the me that drives the car once you've become proficient and you're no longer having to think about where the gear shift goes or how to 3-point turn or whether you do mirror, signal, maneuver or some other order. The I is the part of you that is consciously trying to learn those processes, the part that's desperately learning the speech to give at a wedding or at a conference. And essentially, as the I, the part of us that feels like us, right? This self-aware element of our experience that feels like it is us, can only handle 10 bits of data. When it feels that the me doesn't have the knowledge, the skills, the competency, it doesn't have the trust in the me to do something, that's when the feelings of anxiety will really kick in. And what happens there is that it ends up strangling essentially the capabilities of the me, because the I becomes dominant, the I becomes overbearing, it keeps us awake at night. It means that we forget or stutter our lines, we miss our comic timing on our deliveries, we put the car in the wrong gear, we make mistakes. And it's because the I doesn't trust the me. And it might be that the me doesn't have the skills, right? If you haven't picked up or learned to play a musical instrument, then the me doesn't inherently, intuitively know how to play a musical instrument. The I has to help the me learn the skills. The I likes to think that it's running the show and it's in control and that it knows best. but actually the me is processing far more, far often, far more skillfully. In fact, any skillful delivery is essentially the me, not the I. The I lets go and trusts all the subconscious processes to take place. Conscious attention that's on this, that starts perhaps with some of the flows of the topics that we're considering today, but so many of the words and the structures of the sentences that I'm speaking to you at this very moment are flowing unconsciously from me. I'm not consciously selecting every word, every phrase structure. And that's true for all of us all of the time, particularly when we're doing something we're familiar with, or essentially when we're doing something we're familiar with, whether it's playing a sport or a game, whether it's interacting with someone habitually, whether it's performing our duties at work. And our conscious mind is often somewhere else when we're at work. And that might be focused on work or work problems, but invariably there's lots of processes that the me is doing behind the scenes. And actually, you can probably spend, depending on your job, many moments, many hours, quite unconscious of a lot of it. And the mind, the focused mind, the I, is somewhere else entirely. So the point being is that when the I is not trusting the me to do something, then it will become overwhelmed. And it will become overwhelmed because it can only handle 10 bits of data, give or take. It can't possibly cope with all the things it needs to do because that's not its function. It needs to trust the me. It needs to help translate skills, complex skills, into the me so that the me can adopt them, process them, integrate them, become proficient at them. And then the I needs to get out of the way and let the me get on with what it does best. And so when you are feeling anxious about something, then invariably the I has locked its claws into you. It's completely trying to be completely in control. And that's causing problems, and it won't help you to process things. And what you find is when you start doing the speech and you get into the flow, you relax a bit, someone's laughed at a joke or two that you've given, then the I relaxes a little and the me just starts to flow. And when that happens, things work better and better. I hope that helps. It's very interesting perspective that might really just help bring a curious lens. So, with that, I think we'll draw today's stream to a close. I hope you found some interesting things here to reflect on. I hope that you have enjoyed the practices. So, please like, share, subscribe, share this. Check into our weekly group streams. So I join my colleagues Oliver and Avanti every Wednesday, and we explore topics through a mindful lens. So please come and join us there. If you've got any questions or comments, let us know, and we will try and support you. So thank you very much for taking part in this journey with me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, however you're spent.